stop, joke you broke, love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear. When it hasn't been your day, week, your month, or your year, but I'll be there for you.
Welcome, HL class. This is your teacher, Mr. DeArmas. I'm going to have to be as quick as possible because this is going to be a long lecture, but don't worry. There is no writing on this first lecture. There will be a little homework assignment, but no writing in this first lecture, so just pay attention and get used to the new YouTube experience of my class. This will be the first lecture. It's going to be an intro to how this whole class works and some background info. All right, so first let's talk about the rules. All right. Why am I doing this to you? Why am I making you look at YouTube videos at home? It's because you have a marathon paper 3 coming up in May. And it's going to be a lot more material than just the SL history stuff we've been studying in class. So from now on, instead of doing your wiki words and instead of doing your comprehension quizzes at home, that is no longer your responsibility. Your only homework will be to keep up with these lectures, and you'll be tested on them periodically. Okay, I'll be giving you an exam here and there. I'm going to make them outline exams. You won't be writing full essays. You are going to be writing an outline on how you would answer whatever question I have for you, okay? It shouldn't take you longer than 30 minutes to do. I'll be doing it while I'll be teaching the other class, so you guys will have to catch up in those days, and I won't give you YouTube videos those days that we do those little outline exams, okay? So you have to step it up a bit because you're HL students, but we are going to cover all this stuff, and you'll be more than prepared for your HL exam. Now, the one thing is this, you don't want to fall behind. If you fall behind on these videos, it will pile up. It'll be a lot of work. I'm trying to be as quick as possible, but, well, let's just say this. If you have an exam tomorrow, my friend, and you're watching a lot of videos and just having them pile up, God bless you. Enjoy your day or your long night. All right, so let's get started. We're going back in historic time to the U.S. 1960s, and we're going to review what you learned about in either Ms. Smith or Mr. Cipriani's or whoever you had for AP US History last year. We're going to review it. Don't take notes on this. Just watch and let's review. So we're going to begin with the Civil War. You know about the Civil War. You've lived in America. You've seen this flag around. It happened in 1860s, from 1861 to 65. The two combatants were the North, who we call the Union, and the South, who were the Confederates. And around 600,000 Americans died, all right? This is the most we've seen, as you can see here. 600,000 Americans died, as you can imagine. Why do you think that is? It's because we were killing each other. It's a civil war, all right? Now, what are the causes? Why did this whole thing start? Because of slavery and because of political rivalry, all right? Some states were free states, others were slave states. Let's talk about that in a second. How did it go down? Well, it was a war of attrition. A war of attrition means it was a defensive war for the South, and the North would eventually win with its anaconda plan. It would basically starve the South. No resources for you, kind of like an anaconda snake wrapping around you. What are the consequences? The Union survives. The South was completely and utterly destroyed, which led to what we call the Reconstruction. I'll talk about that in a minute. So you guys can see some wars America's participated in the 20th century. We've already covered World War I. We'll be covering World War II and the Cold War soon. But here you can see that we lost the most in the Civil War. And here we can see why. It's because of slavery. You can see here some of the segregation and the racism that happened after the Civil War. But this is what it was like being a slave. All right? And this is what it was like working in a sugar factory where basically you'd be pressing sugar all day. It was horrible. People lived until they were about 25 years old. How did the slaves get here? Well, they would be on slave ships, about 400 on board, packed like rabbits. It was horrible. Each person had less room than a coffin. It was terrible. Here we can see a cartoon of people selling even babies. Yes, this is your history. It was horrible stuff. Okay? And I'll be showing you a video now on Amistad.
Dios te bendice, hija. Dios te bendice. Dios os perdona y os ama a todos. Ala, ala, que Dios os perdona.
So here we can see, that was a horrible video, I know, I'm sorry about that. Let's talk about the politics, okay? In the blue right here, you can see the free states in the north, the slave states in the south. You guys know how your Senate works. 2 senators that are each sent to Washington, D.C. Imagine right here, if we're trying to make all of America either free or slave, as we keep adding in territories and making them states, it was always a political discussion whether the new state was going to be a free state or a slave state. And there were lots of compromises you learned about last year. Who won the war? Remember, you guys, I always tell you, follow the money. Well, who had more, the Union or the Confederacy? There's no question. The Union had more people, had more goods manufactured, had more merchant ships, railroad tracks, grain, and farms. They were bound to win. And as you can see here, they had many more people. The North had more people, the South not so much. The North even had people that were eligible but did not serve. They actually paid for people to serve instead of them. And here we can see the major battles. All right, it began in Fort Sumter. Vicksburg is a huge and bloody one. You've heard of Antietam, Gettysburg Address, all these famous battles. Here we can see what they look like. We only have paintings. In the 1860s, there were no photographs. Here we can see some African Americans that had joined the Union after the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves in the South. Great move. And here we can see what it looked like in Atlanta and other places that were completely destroyed by the Civil War. Now, after the Civil War, we had a period called the Reconstruction, and we were trying to get the South to join with the North. We had 3 slavery amendments. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th allowed for natural citizenship if you were born in America. And the 15th gave the equal right for both blacks and whites to vote. But remember, we're in $7 billion worth of debt after the war. And the North will not have the stomach to continue fighting for black rights. So even though we had even some African American senators in this time, it would be followed by 100 years of horrible racism. Okay, so here we can see the 10% plan. As long as 10% of folks took an oath to not be opposed and fight the Union soldiers that were coming into the South, you could join the Union again. And here we can see what it was like in this time. African Americans voting for the first time. It was huge. The good consequences were unified. You don't have 2 countries, you have just one. But some of the bad consequences, as you know, eventually Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Let's talk about the next big topic in U.S. history, an idea called manifest destiny, the idea of going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean over here. How did we do it? Well, first and foremost, the Louisiana Purchase. We purchased this from Napoleon for about $15 million. He used these funds to go and try to defeat the Haitian Revolution that he did not beat in Haiti because there was so much sugar plantation there. We also annexed Texas from the Mexicans, and eventually, after the Mexican-American War, stole all of West United States from the Mexicans for, again, $15 million. The final piece we got from the British, we bought it from the Oregon Treaty. And this is how the America came to be. These 48 continuous states, we got them from the French, the Spanish, and the British. Okay, here we can see a famous painting called Manifest Destiny, us going from east to west. And here we can see what it was like fighting the Mexicans. We'll talk a lot about this Mexican Revolution soon when we go and discuss Mexico's heritage in the upcoming lectures. Here we can see how the Americans came in and eventually came upon El DF. Finally, we bombarded the capital until they gave up and sold us all this territory for about $15 million, which is why it sounds so Hispanic. Los Angeles, California, San Francisco. Think about these things, okay? Now, what resulted? Boom towns. People moved out to the west. They found silver and gold, and overnight, a town became a booming industry. It's why we call them the 49ers. In 1849, there was a gold rush to San Francisco. And in the Midwest, people lived in mud houses, sod houses. It was a very tough time for them. They had bonanza farms, huge mechanized farms. It's how we fed the Northeasterners, the rich bankers. What happened to the Indians that lived there? Well, as you can see here, once upon a time, lots of Indians living over here, but over time we moved them into reservations, mainly in Oklahoma and the Dakotas, okay, Oklahoma, and over here, very sad, we massacred all these Indians. Here we can see a very sad movement of Indians, one of which was the Trail of Tears, very sad. How did we kill the Plains Indians? We killed all the buffalo they loved and enjoyed. Very sad photo right here. All the buffalo, the millions killed. The next chapter, the Second Industrial Revolution. So by the 1880s, 20 years after the Civil War, we were a huge united country covered in railroads, as you can see here, and railroads means industry. If we had people selling croquetas over here, they could now sell croquetas over here and eventually over here. That means more money for everybody. But eventually this capitalism became unregulated and people became filthy, stinking rich. And you know these people. You've heard of their names. J.P. Morgan Chase, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vandy. These people owned everything in America, and unfortunately these children and many others, 70% of people were working for a wage and were exploited heavily. So what was on the rise? Marxism, as you can imagine. America was ripe for Marxism and for lots of immigrants coming in. Here we can see in the 1870s and 80s, lots of immigrants came from Eastern Europe, places like Italy, Poland, and all labor was divided. People spent 12 hours a day just putting car factory parts together, radio parts. Here we can see Pollock cartoons commenting on Rockefeller Oil's control of the entire country, from the populace to the court systems in Washington, D.C. And here we can see Mr. Morgan, who is really rocking the boat here. Is it America or Mr. Morgan? All right, so these enormous behemoths of wealth controlled America in this time. Here we can see all the inventions created in this time, the steam engine, the cotton gin. You learned this last year. Yes, once upon a time, America created all things. Up until the 1950s, we were a majorly manufacturing country. How did we fight back? Well, anarchists bombed the Haymarket Square riot. We made unions. We went on boycotts. And let's see, has it really changed, this huge inequality of wealth? Let me show you this video really quickly. It talks about the modern age. Very sad stuff.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are. Teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about.
Whoa, right? Tell me about it. I can't believe that's how rich they are. Well, let's finish this lecture, you guys, and let's actually talk about what's relevant here, all right? The Monroe Doctrine, this will be very relevant for the upcoming lectures because remember, in HL history, we study not American history. We just reviewed all of it in about minutes. Instead, we cover what was happening outside of the Americas within the Americas, so mainly here, Latin America. Okay, we're going to see how they dealt with the rise of the United States. So, a big part of this was the Monroe Doctrine. What is the Monroe Doctrine? It was basically America viewing any attempt by Europe to interfere in the Western Hemisphere as an act of aggression, justifying a response from us. And as you can imagine, it was put forward by President Monroe in 1820. Why did he do it? Because Latin America was becoming independent. Here you can see all the countries that became independent in this time, due to two people mainly, a man named Simón Bolívar and another man named José San Martín. San Martín liberated Chile and Argentina, and in the north, Simón Bolívar liberated these places, and eventually all of Latin America was liberated from the Spanish. We wanted to protect these new democracies. Meanwhile, in Europe, remember, the Congress of Vienna was happening. This is after Napoleon's defeat. We're talking about the early 19th century here, all right? And the Congress of Vienna's main goal, if you remember, was to quell any nationalist uprisings like that which happened in France, all right? They wanted to put the monarchies back in power, okay? So this is the exact opposite of what America wanted over here. The doctrine is rightfully anticipating Europeans trying to get into Latin America as they already had in Asia and as they already had in Africa. Remember, they pieced and took everything in Africa. Now, what was the reality? What happened once President Monroe announced this doctrine? Well, Great Britain definitely approved because they wanted neutral seas. Neutral seas means more free trade, and more free trade means neo-mercantilism. We have more people trading, more capitalism. Okay, this is a great thing for the Brits who control the world at this point, and they'd love to have America as a partner in this. Okay, as you can see here, if the Europeans were to actually try, they'd be facing America's ships if they wanted to invade Latin America. But unfortunately for the Latin Americans, even though they were grateful because they needed protection from independence, we would eventually use this to gain Hawaii from the Hawaiians, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines from the Spanish, Panama Canal from Colombia, Guantanamo Bay from the Cubans, and we would even try to get Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, all of Cuba, Honduras, Haiti, Guatemala, Costa Rica, El Salvador. And as the Cold War goes on, as you'll see later, the list will go on in how many interventions America's played a role in. It's kind of crazy, okay? As you can see here in this map, we have tried all over Latin America to take control and expand our empire. Manifest Destiny did not end when we went from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We would have loved to go south and take more, but we were stopped, okay? And here you can see the American Empire in 1903. By 1903, we did have Hawaii and Midway and Wake, and we had the Philippines and Guam. And here you can see a classic cartoons of how the Latin Americans took Uncle Sam, taking away everything from them. So, what is your homework for today, guys? Now, I'm only going to actually give you a written homework assignment just this once. This is just to make sure that people actually saw this, and I know it's kind of a tricky bastard move to do from your teacher, but I am Mr. Diarmas after all. So, I want you to do these 3 simple things in a sheet of paper. Number 1, put the initials of your name in number form. So my name is Oscar Francisco Diarmas. O is the 16th letter of the alphabet, so that would be 16. F is A, B, C, D, E. F is number 6. D, A, B, C, D is number 4. So my three initials would be 1664. Number 2, I'd like you to do just a quick 3-sentence summary of this video. Make it unique, all right? You know, honestly, just to make it even simpler, make it 2 sentences. No big deal. Just make it unique so that I know that nobody copied each other. And finally, put your name backwards. My name is Oscar D. Armis. Put your name backwards for number 3. Don't tell anybody about this, the other HL kids. Let them get their 2 Fs. You will get a free 2 As for doing this. I applaud thee for watching these videos. And remember, I'll be giving you these videos every single time you have a class. Expect a YouTube video. You can find it on my YouTube channel, Mr. D. Armis. And I'll be telling you about this. You guys, thank you so much for watching. And hopefully we'll learn a lot together, both in class and beyond. Thank you so much. Have a great day.